He stood in front of the entire town, holding a bag full of gold. No one said a word. Then, he gave it away. Today, True Wild West Stories brings you a powerful tale of Marcus, a humble cowboy who stumbled upon a hidden gold mine deep in the canyon. But what he did next shocked everyone. Was it foolishness or something far greater? The wooden floor creaked as Marcus stepped into Brooks' saloon. Dust hung in the air like mist over the dry plains, and the air was thick with the sharp tang of corn whiskey. The place hadn't changed in years. Same broken ceiling fan spinning lazily, same sagging bar counter, and that same old banjo strumming a tired tune from the corner, where an old man sat half asleep, fingers dancing on worn strings. Marcus took his usual seat near the back, close enough to hear but far enough to be left alone. He kept his hat low, letting the conversations of the drunks around him flow without interruption. Their voices rose and fell with the rhythm of their drinks, words slurring into one another, except when the subject of gold came up. "Swear on my mother's grave," one man rasped, holding up a shaky finger. "Saw a flicker just past Red Rock Canyon, like the sun cracked open the mountain." Another scoffed, "You saw whiskey, not gold." A third leaned in, his breath ripe. "He ain't lying. That canyon's cursed, but cursed or not, it's hiding something." The talk circled around like smoke, thick with doubt and temptation. Marcus didn't speak, didn't even shift, but his fingers twitched under the table. Eleanor passed by with a tray of empty glasses. Her gray-streaked hair was tied back, and her eyes, sharp as nails, caught Marcus's gaze just for a second. "You look like you're listening too hard," she said quietly, sliding a glass his way. "Don't let gold drag you down like it did my husband." Marcus gave her a nod. No promises. Outside, the sun was beginning to dip behind the hills, casting long golden shadows through the dusty windows. Inside, the talk grew louder. Someone knocked over a stool. Laughter erupted, then died suddenly when the man who started the gold rumor stood up, swaying, eyes wide. "I saw it," he said again, louder this time. There was light, real light, like fire behind stone, not no moonlight trick. The saloon hushed. Even the banjo paused. Marcus felt it then, like a ripple under the skin. He'd heard whispers of gold before, like every man in that town. But this was different. The way silence fell, the way even Eleanor stood still behind the counter, there was something in it. He reached down slowly and touched the leather pouch tied to his belt. It was old, scuffed, the kind that had seen better days, much like Marcus himself. Inside was a folded map he hadn't looked at in years, a keepsake from someone who once believed in more than just scraping by. He hadn't come in looking for anything tonight. Not answers, not hope. Just a glass of something strong and a quiet corner. But something had stirred, an itch, a pull. As the talk resumed and the banjo picked up a new, hopeful tune, Marcus's eyes drifted toward the door. The wind outside carried the scent of dust and pine, of open roads and unmarked trails. And in his chest, that quiet voice, the one he'd ignored for years, spoke again. It might be time. Morning came quiet and cold. The last days of spring still carried the chill of winter, and the grass in the fields shimmered with a silver coat of dew. The sun barely crept over the distant hills, casting a pale gold glow on the worn wooden boards of the old barn. Inside, Marcus moved with slow, deliberate steps, stuffing a threadbare blanket, a tin cup, and a roll of jerky into a satchel that had seen better years. The barn creaked with each shift of weight, its roof patched with rusted tin and prayer. A half-eaten loaf of cornbread sat on the ledge beside a cold cup of coffee. He broke off a piece, chewing without much thought, the dry crumbs sticking to his teeth. Outside, the cattle stirred, thin, weary creatures, like the land they grazed. This wasn't a place of bounty. It had been years since the fields yielded more than dust and disappointment. From somewhere deep in his memory, his mother's voice drifted in, soft, warning, as if caught on the morning wind. Even a gift from the sky comes with a cost. He paused, staring out at the sun just starting to climb. Was it a gift he was chasing, or a curse dressed in gold? A small crunch behind him made him turn. Sam stood at the edge of the barn, barefoot, shirt half buttoned, eyes still heavy with sleep but burning with questions. The boy was no older than 10, lean and tanned from the sun, nose running just a little. "Where are you going?" Sam asked. Marcus slung the satchel over his shoulder. "Nowhere far." The boy frowned. "You taking the trail to the ridge?" Marcus hesitated. "Just checking something." "I can come," Sam blurted, stepping closer. "I ain't scared of the ridge. I can help. I don't eat much." Marcus smiled faintly. "I know you don't, but this ain't for kids." Sam's shoulders slumped, lips pressed into a line. "You always say that. It's true every time." The boy sniffed, wiping his nose on his sleeve. "You gonna come back?" Marcus didn't answer right away. He looked past the boy, out at the cattle moving slow through the mist. One of them, the old black one with the crooked horn, let out a tired low. They'd been his burden for years, unprofitable, stubborn, but familiar. He watched them a moment longer, then turned back to Sam. "Look after him for me," Marcus said, nodding toward the herd. "You leaving for Gold?" Sam asked, voice quiet now. Marcus didn't nod, but he didn't deny it. He stepped past the boy, patting his head once, then mounted the old sorrel mare tethered outside the barn. The horse snorted, eager to move. With one last glance back at the sagging barn and the pale blue hills, Marcus took the reins. The hooves clopped softly over the dirt path, slow at first, then steady. The road ahead wound between fence posts and scrub brush, leading to the place folks whispered about, Red Rock Canyon. Behind him, the barn faded into the morning mist, and the calls of the cattle grew faint. By the time the sun cleared the treetops, Marcus was nothing more than a figure in the distance, riding toward something uncertain, pulled by the promise of gold and the weight of something far heavier. The sun was merciless. By midday, it bore down on Red Rock Ridge like an open furnace. The stones shimmered with heat, every surface blazing in hues of rust and flame. Marcus's shirt clung to his back, soaked with sweat. His lips cracked, throat dry as bone, and each step felt like dragging a sack of bricks. There wasn't a tree in sight, not a single patch of shade, just rock, dust, and the moan of wind weaving between crags. His boots scuffed over the parched soil as he climbed a steep slope, eyes squinting beneath the brim of his hat. Somewhere behind him, the trail had vanished. Before him, only sharp ridges and jagged cliffs. He was too far in to turn back. He remembered something an old man once said back in Brooks Tavern. Gold hides in the cracks where sun don't reach. That shine, it lives where it shouldn't. Marcus scanned the walls of the canyon. Everything was dry, scorched, as if fire had passed through. But then, just behind a crooked boulder, he spotted a thin stream of water trickling between two stones. Barely a trickle, but enough. He dropped to his knees, pulled a square cloth from his pocket, worn but clean, and stretched it over the mouth of his tin cup. With steady hands, he let the water drip through, filtering out grit and sand. The few ounces it gave were warm, earthy, and faintly metallic, but it was water. He drank slowly, letting it wet the corners of his mouth first, then down his throat. He closed his eyes, savoring the relief. The wind tugged at his sleeves, and dust swirled in the air like it had secrets to tell. Refreshed just enough to move, Marcus pulled out a rusted trowel from his pack. He crouched beside the rock face where the stream had emerged. The stone here was softer, red shale layered in thin veins. He chipped at it, gently at first, then harder. Each stroke echoed in the canyon like the tick of a slow clock. His hands blistered, but he worked methodically, clearing the topsoil and brushing it aside with the back of his hand. It was tedious work under a brutal sun. Then, something glinted. He paused, heart thudding against his ribs. At first he thought it was mica, a fool's shine. But as he brushed again, he saw them. Tiny flecks, no larger than a seed, but unmistakable in color. A soft, warm glint. Gold. He leaned in closer, staring hard. The flecks weren't many, but they were there. Real, tangible. A whisper of promise in a land of silence. Marcus sat back on his heels, breathing heavy, sweat pouring into his eyes. He stared at the find, not with triumph, but disbelief. After all the miles, the rumors, the silence, here it was. He reached into his pack, pulled out a small leather pouch and scraped the specks into it, careful not to lose a single one. His hands trembled slightly, not from excitement, but exhaustion. He looked out across the ridge. The sun still blazed, but something had changed. There was proof now, a reason to stay, a reason to dig deeper. And just as he zipped the pouch closed, he felt it. Not wind, not the call of a hawk overhead, but presence. Behind him, on the ridge, boots scraped against stone. He turned slowly, breath caught halfway in his chest. A shadow stretched across the rock behind him. Someone was watching. Marcus spun around, heart pounding in his ears. The figure behind him stepped forward, boots crunching gravel. It wasn't a bandit or some wandering drifter. The man wore a sun-bleached hat, its brim curled from years under harsh light. His beard was coarse and white, hands gnarled like old tree roots. His eyes, a pale gray blue, studied Marcus with quiet weight. "Didn't mean to spook you," the old man said, voice raspy like sandpaper. "Name's Henry." Henry Dalton Marcus stayed crouched, still catching his breath. You been following me?" "Nah, I've been up here longer than you've been shaving." Henry chuckled dryly, then looked toward the shallow dig. "Saw your smoke this morning. Figured I'd come see what kind of fool was scratching red rock." Marcus stood and dusted his pants. "Didn't know this place was claimed." "It ain't. Not legally." "But it's got a long memory," Henry muttered, stepping closer. You find anything? Marcus hesitated, then opened the pouch slightly, just enough to let the older man glimpse the fine gold dust inside. Henry didn't smile. In fact, something in his face tightened. "Figures," he murmured. "It still bleeds a little." They moved into the shade of a narrow rock opening, a shallow cave barely wide enough for two. The heat eased and the dust settled. Light sliced in through cracks above, casting slanted beams that caught the flecks of mica in the walls. The place smelled faintly of sulfur and old stone. Henry ran a finger along a patch of yellow-streaked soil and rubbed it between his fingers. "Limonite mixed with sulfur," he said, more to himself than to Marcus. "Means it runs deep, but so do the fumes. Breathe too much of it and your lungs'll sing you to sleep." Marcus leaned against the wall, eyes on the man's weathered hands. "You sound like you've done this before." "I was part of a crew, about 25 years back," Henry said slowly. "Back when Red Rock still had its name written in ink, not blood." He crouched and scraped at the floor with a small pick, revealing a faint seam of darker rock. "We dug in farther than we should have. One man, Ellis, swore he saw a glint that could feed 10 families. Wouldn't stop. Kept pushing past the cracks. One day, the wall gave in." Henry's voice softened. "He was buried before we heard the first snap." Marcus didn't speak. The silence between them felt thick, heavy with dust and memory. Henry straightened with a groan and pointed to a faint discoloration near the ceiling. "That spot's weak. You dig past that line, you better have someone writing your epitaph." "But there's still gold," Marcus said quietly, more a statement than a question. "There's always gold," Henry replied, turning to face him. "Question is what it costs." He moved to the entrance of the cave, paused, and glanced back. "You young ones always think you'll be the lucky one, that you'll take and it won't take back. That gold don't work that way." Marcus felt a chill despite the heat. "Why are you telling me this?" Henry looked out at the shimmering rocks. "Because I seen men go hollow chasing it. Because I buried friends who thought a little shine would fix what was broken." A moment passed. Then he added, almost as an afterthought, "You remind me of someone." He didn't say who. Marcus watched as the old miner adjusted his pack and stepped back out into the light. The sun caught his silver hair, and for a second he looked like a ghost wandering through memory. Just before disappearing down the ridge, Henry turned once more. His voice was softer this time, nearly swallowed by the wind. "Gold'll take more than it gives, son. Remember that." Then he was gone, boots scuffing into silence. Marcus stood there a long while, staring at the place where the man had vanished. In his hand, the pouch of golden flecks felt heavier than before. The market buzzed with life. It was the last weekend of spring, and the town square swelled with sound, barrels rolling across cobblestone, vendors shouting prices, the clink of coins trading hands. The scent of hay, horses, and cinnamon apples drifted through the air. A fiddle played somewhere near the bakery, and children chased each other between crates of early strawberries and sacks of cornmeal. Marcus stepped into the crowd with his hat low, his boots dusty from the trail. He hadn't been back to Brook since leaving for Red Rock. Now the town looked louder, brighter, almost foreign. At a corner stall near the blacksmith, Eleanor was arranging old silverware onto a cloth-covered table. Her gray hair was braided tight, and her shawl hung loosely over her shoulders. She looked up as Marcus passed. "Well, well," she said, folding her arms. "Did the cattle finally wander back, or have you taken to hiding in the hills?" Marcus offered a tight smile, went out past the ridge, needed time to think. Eleanor didn't return the smile. Her eyes narrowed slightly, not in anger, but something close to suspicion. Folks don't come back from Red Rock with clean boots and quieter eyes. Marcus shifted his weight. Didn't go that far. She held his gaze for a beat longer than was comfortable, then went back to rearranging her goods. Behind her, a tray of fresh apple pies steamed gently in the morning sun, filling the air with sweet nostalgia. He moved on, weaving through the crowd, until he found what he was looking for. An old man selling books and writing tools under a faded green awning. The selection was modest, mostly hymnals and dog-eared novels, but a worn leather notebook caught Marcus's eye. He picked it up, thumbing through the blank pages. "Used to belong to a preacher," the man said. "Wrote his sermons in there." "Good paper." Marcus handed over a coin and tucked the notebook into his coat. He found a quiet bench near the edge of the square and opened to the first page. Slowly, carefully, he began to write. May 14th. First signs. Ridge above East Fork. Gold dust. Caution. His hand shook a little, not from fear, but from the weight of putting something real into words, something he couldn't say aloud. A shadow passed over him. "Mind if I sit?" asked a warm voice. It was Reverend Hale, broad-shouldered, with a sun-browned face and a calm presence. He carried a bag of root vegetables and wore his usual black vest. Marcus nodded. The Reverend sat, looking out at the bustling street. "Funny thing," he said, "how spring brings people out of their worries. All it takes is a little sun, a few apples, and we remember how to smile." Marcus didn't answer. Reverend Hale turned to him. "You been quiet, son. Folks ask about you. Eleanor says you've changed." Marcus tucked the notebook deeper into his coat. "Just needed time away. Went out with the cattle, that's all." It was the first real lie. It slid out with surprising ease. The Reverend studied him for a long second. "There's nothing wrong with solitude," he said gently, "but don't shut the door on community. When we start keeping secrets, they tend to grow teeth." Marcus forced a nod. Hale smiled, patted his shoulder, and walked off toward the chapel with his vegetables. Marcus stayed seated, eyes scanning the crowd. Then he saw it. Across the square, just beyond the spice merchant's booth, a man in a tan coat leaned casually against a post, watching. His hat was pulled low, his stance easy, but his eyes were fixed on Marcus. Marcus looked away. When he glanced back, the man was gone. The heat had shifted. By the time Marcus returned to Red Rock Ridge, summer had taken root. The breeze was gone, replaced by stillness that pressed down like a blanket. The dirt road leading into the canyon kicked up red dust with every step, coating his boots and throat. Even the cacti seemed to droop under the weight of the midday sun. He walked with purpose, head down, canteen half full. His shirt clung to him, sweat bleeding through the fabric. Somewhere in the distance, a long, low bellow echoed off the rocks. A cow, maybe, or a steer gone astray. For a moment, Marcus paused. That sound, deep and familiar, stirred memories of early mornings on the ranch, the scent of wet hay, the way his father used to whistle while patching fences. But that life felt far away now, a story someone else had told. He was rounding a bend when a twig snapped sharply behind him. He turned fast, hand brushing the handle of his pickaxe. From behind a cluster of scrub, the small figure emerged, sheepish and dusty. "Sam?" The boy froze, one foot still mid-step. I was going to tell you, I swear." Marcus exhaled sharply, marching toward him. "What the hell are you doing out here? You know how far this is from the farm?" Sam fidgeted, eyes wide. "I saw you packing and leaving again. Figured you weren't out just herding cows." Marcus clenched his jaw, looking past the boy to the trail behind. No other tracks, just Sam's, small and scattered. "You followed me?" Sam shrugged. "I brought food. And a knife. And I ain't scared. I can help." "You could have gotten lost," Marcus snapped. "Or worse." The boy's face fell. He looked down, kicking at a stone. "I just didn't want to be left behind again." The anger in Marcus ebbed, giving way to something heavier. He ran a hand over his face, then sighed. "All right," he muttered, "but you do exactly what I say. You slow me down or start whining, I send you back. Got it?" Sam's face lit up. "Got it!" They moved together along the narrow trail, the boy skipping beside him with newfound energy. As they climbed higher, the land turned harsher. Loose shale underfoot, thorny brush, the occasional snake track winding across the path. Sam picked up a dry stick and began whittling it with his small knife. "What are you doing that for?" Marcus asked. The boy grinned. "Marking the way, in case we get turned around." He peeled the bark into rings and jammed the sticks upright along bends in the trail. Smart kid. Around a sharp corner, the canyon opened slightly into a flat stretch of reddish soil. There, embedded into the rock wall, was something Marcus hadn't seen before. "Hold up," he said, motioning for Sam to stop. They approached slowly. A long, faded groove cut across the stone. An old bore mark, weathered but unmistakable. Just above it, faint chisel marks dotted the surface in a rough arc. Someone had dug here. "Is it yours?" Sam asked. Marcus shook his head. "Too old. Could be a decade or more." He crouched down, brushing away dust and pebbles. A rusted tin can lay half buried beneath the rocks, flattened by time but still holding its shape. "There were others," Marcus murmured, "and they got this far." Sam bent to look closer. "Think they found it?" "Maybe," Marcus replied, voice low. "Maybe not. Depends on whether they made it out." They stood in silence a moment longer, both taking in the ghost of past ambition carved into stone. Then, as Marcus straightened, movement caught the edge of his vision. Up along the ridge, partially hidden by scrub and rock, a figure stood. Tall, still, watching. Before Marcus could say a word, it stepped behind a boulder and vanished. "Did you see that?" he whispered. Sam looked up. "What?" Marcus scanned the ledge. Nothing now, just sky and rock. He put a hand on the boy's shoulder. "Stay close." The fire cracked gently in the wind. Marcus had built it low, using dry sagebrush and broken twigs. The flames licked upward with a quiet hunger, casting soft glows on the canyon wall behind them. Sam sat cross-legged, sketching lines into a scrap of canvas with a bit of charcoal. His version of a map, rough and childlike but earnest. The sun had dropped, leaving the sky streaked with orange and violet. Night crept over Red Rock Ridge, bringing with it a breath of coolness that tugged at their sleeves. Marcus stirred the small tin pot over the fire, the scent of beans and jerky mixing with smoke. Then came footsteps. Not hurried, not cautious, just steady, confident. Marcus rose to his feet slowly. From behind a low ridge of stone stepped a man, tall and lean, with dark boots, a wide hat, and a beard that looked carefully unkempt. He smiled like someone used to being welcome, though his eyes scanned everything with quiet calculation. "Evenin'," the man said. "Name's Clyde Thompson. Don't suppose you boys mind a little company?" Marcus didn't answer right away. His eyes narrowed, but he gave a small nod. "Fire's warm. Sit if you like." Clyde did just that, settling on a flat rock near the flames, unshouldering a small pack and patting dust from his knees. "Didn't expect to find neighbors out here," Clyde said, voice smooth. "Red Rock ain't exactly Main Street." Sam looked up from his drawing, curious. "We're just passing through," Marcus said flatly. Clyde chuckled. "Ain't we all?" He pulled out a flask, took a sip, and offered it. Marcus declined with a shake of his head. "What brings you out this way, Mr. Thompson?" Marcus asked, watching closely. "Oh, same as most folks who come poking around these hills." Heard tales, dust in the streams, glimmers in the rock, gold fever, you know the kind. Sam looked up too quickly, eyes wide. Clyde caught it. "Got yourself a little prospector here?" he teased, nodding toward the boy. "He just likes drawing maps," Marcus replied. "Makes the days pass." Clyde smiled, but something flickered behind it. "Well now, maybe he can help me mark a few spots," Clyde said. "I've been up that slope to the north. Saw some strange grooves in the rock. Could be old diggins." He pulled a few small stakes from his bag. "Mind if I help mark the trail?" Marcus hesitated, then nodded once. "Be our guest." For the next hour they walked the ridge together, Clyde whistling, Sam humming softly, Marcus silent. Clyde drove small wooden stakes into the dirt, one by one, each tied with a piece of faded blue cloth. But something felt off. When Marcus doubled back to check the last few markers, he saw it. Clyde had shifted their positions, slightly, subtly, just enough to mislead someone following later. Back at camp, Sam was talking too freely. "We saw some old mine marks, didn't we, Marcus? And that can with—" "That's enough," Marcus cut in sharply. Sam looked down, embarrassed. Clyde raised an eyebrow but said nothing. He simply poked at the fire with a stick, embers swirling upward. After a long silence, he stood. "Well, boys," he said with an easy grin, "reckon I'll find my own camp before the moon's up." He dusted off his coat, adjusted his pack, and tipped his hat. "But mark my words, we'll cross paths again. Maybe sooner than you think." Then he turned and disappeared into the dark, his boots fading into the rustle of sage and sand. Marcus watched the shadows long after he was gone. The cave breathed like a beast in its sleep. Marcus had never liked enclosed places. The deeper they went into the old shaft, the more the air thickened, like it held its breath with them. The torch in his hand flickered, shadows dancing on wet stone. Sam followed behind, quiet for once, careful with every step. Then came the sound, a dull crack somewhere behind them. Not loud, but deep, like something old finally giving way. Marcus froze. "Stop." Sam halted mid-step. They both listened. Another sound, a soft, drawn-out groan of shifting earth. "The walls are moving," Sam whispered. Marcus turned back, scanning the tunnel. Moisture clung to the walls like sweat. Long abandoned bore marks trailed along the stone, some filled with dust, others with small bits of broken tools. "This part wasn't here before," Sam said, pointing at a narrow path off to the right. They followed it cautiously. It led to a cavity, small and hollowed out like a wound. A rusted pick lay against the wall, its handle cracked but still intact, and just above it, scratched into the rock by hand, was a name. L.W. Croft, 1891. Marcus traced the letters with his fingers. The edges were chipped, the lines uneven, but deliberate. This wasn't graffiti. It was a mark of passage, or a warning. "I've seen that name before," Sam murmured. Marcus nodded slowly. "Old ledger back in town. List of men who came and never left." They stared at the carving in silence. A whisper of wind passed through the tunnel, brushing past them like a ghost's breath. Suddenly, another crack, this one sharper, followed by a low rumble. Marcus spun around just in time to see a wall of dirt and rock shift behind them. "Run!" They bolted, Marcus grabbing Sam's arm, pulling him back the way they came. Dust poured down from the ceiling, and a massive slab broke loose, crashing where they'd just stood. Sam slipped, nearly going down, but his hand caught a wooden stake jammed into the wall, one he'd placed earlier, marking the trail. It held just enough for him to regain balance. They stumbled out of the collapsing tunnel, gasping in the damp air. Behind them, the passage sealed shut with a deafening thud. For several minutes neither of them spoke. Then Sam looked up, voice shaky. "That could have been it." Marcus didn't answer. He knelt, opened his small leather-bound notebook, and scribbled, "If I make it out alive, I'll choose a different road." He stared at the words for a moment, then shut the book and placed it back in his coat. They sat there in the dark, lit only by the flickering torch. The cave had quieted again, but something felt changed. Not just the structure, something deeper, like the place had taken notice of them. Sam broke the silence. "Do you think people died in there?" Marcus nodded. "Not just people. Dreams, hopes, maybe whole lives." The boy swallowed hard. Then, just as Marcus was about to suggest they head back to camp, a sound echoed from deeper within the canyon, distant, strange. A laugh. Not loud, not wild, just soft and deliberate. A man's laugh. It bounced off the rock walls and faded like a memory neither of them wanted to keep. Marcus stood slowly, eyes scanning the darkness. "Someone's out there," Sam whispered. "I know," Marcus replied. Morning came damp and gray, the kind that left your boots heavy and your breath short. The rain had passed some time before dawn, leaving the red rock ridge slick with mud and mist. Water trickled down from the high stones, carving shallow veins through the soil. Marcus stepped carefully, squinting at the ground. What he saw stopped him cold. Streaks, discolored lines swirled in the wet dirt, shimmering faintly in the dim light. Not water, not clay, veins of mineral, burnt orange and pale gold, bending and branching like roots. Behind him, Sam whistled low. "It looks like the earth bled in the night." Marcus knelt, brushing aside the muck with gloved fingers. The color beneath was bright, unmistakable, pyrite at the least, maybe more. Henry's voice echoed in his mind. "The earth don't lie, son. Dirt's got a memory stronger than any man's." He stood slowly, heart tight in his chest. The signs were no longer whispers, they were shouting. "This is real," Marcus muttered. Sam looked up, grinning. "You mean we found it?" Marcus didn't answer. Just then, Sam's boot hit something soft. He looked down, bent, and pulled free a piece of crumpled paper, half buried in the mud. "It's old," he said, carefully unfolding it. Marcus stepped closer. It was a flyer, yellowed, edges curled, but the ink still legible. "Lost claim, deep ridge vein, untouched, location unknown, last seen, 1893. A crudely drawn map followed, faded but eerily familiar. Sam pointed. "That ridge looks like where we camped 2 nights ago." Marcus took the paper and studied it. His stomach twisted. This wasn't just a rumor anymore. This place had been marked long ago. "Where'd you find this?" he asked. "Right there," Sam said, pointing behind them. And that's when the voice came, smooth as oil. "Good eyes, kid." They turned. Clyde Thompson stood a few paces away, hands in his pockets, smile lazy. His coat was dry, too dry for someone who'd just weathered the same storm. He'd been watching, waiting. "Didn't think I'd see you boys out here again so soon," Clyde said. Marcus tucked the flyer into his vest. "Just stretching our legs." Clyde's eyes flicked to the muddy veins on the ground. "Looks like the land stretched too." No one laughed. Sam tried to lighten the mood. "Mr. Clyde, if we really do find gold, I think I'll buy myself a horse. A black one, maybe with a white star on its head." Clyde chuckled. "You dream big, kid. That's good. Just remember, gold don't come free." He stepped forward, casually pulling a small stake from his satchel, taller than the others, painted red at the top. Without asking, he walked toward the narrow entrance of the cave they'd explored before. With a practiced motion, he drove the stake into the ground. It stood firm, swaying just slightly in the morning breeze. Marcus said nothing, but he felt the knot tighten in his gut. Territory. That's what Clyde was claiming. Ownership without permission. Clyde tipped his hat, all charm again. "Best of luck, gentlemen." He turned and walked off, whistling a tune that vanished into the wind. Marcus watched the red-topped stake, now planted just beside his own faded blue one. Beside him, Sam whispered, "He's going to come back, isn't he?" Marcus didn't reply. He just looked at the ground, at the glinting earth, the lies it told, and the truths it refused to hide. The cave's breath was damp and stale, its walls cold to the touch. The only light came from the flickering torch Clyde held aloft, its flame stretching shadows across stone and faces alike. Marcus crouched near a jagged wall, notebook open on his knee. He had just sketched a faint outline of the vein they'd found earlier, marking it with a rough triangle. Beside it, in smaller script, he wrote, "Safe extraction, natural balance, community over greed." Behind him, Sam adjusted a tiny wax candle on a rock ledge. The flame barely held, but its glow was gentle, honest, like the boy himself. Clyde paced nearby, boots echoing faintly. "You boys are serious about this, I'll give you that," he said, nodding toward the markings on the wall. "But serious don't keep you fed. Gold does." Marcus said nothing, just closed the journal slowly. Clyde's tone shifted. "Look, I got contacts, equipment, people who can move this fast and quiet. We strike it together, we split it. I'll even be generous, 70-30. Sam blinked. 70 for you? Clyde turned, smile wide. Sure, I take the risk. You too? You scout, maybe dig. But the haul? That takes muscle and machines. Marcus stood, brushing dust from his pants. That's not a deal. That's a takeover. Clyde's face didn't change, but the warmth in his voice cooled. You don't want trouble out here. Land like this? No deeds, no fences, just who gets there first and who stays. Sam stepped forward, candle in hand. We're not selling it out. Marcus is doing this the right way. Marcus put a hand on Sam's shoulder, gently guiding him back. We came here looking for something, Marcus said, his voice calm. But not just gold. If you can't see that, we don't have anything to discuss. For a moment, the only sound was the low crackle of Clyde's torch. Then Clyde chuckled, shaking his head. You sound just like Henry did. Preachy, noble, poor. He leaned closer, torchlight dancing in his eyes. You'll come around. Maybe not today. Maybe when the dirt gets harder or when the food runs low. But you'll come looking. Marcus stared back, unwavering. Maybe, but not to you. Clyde backed away with a smirk. Suit yourself. He turned and walked down the narrow path, his torch casting long shadows that stretched like claws across the walls. The silence he left behind was heavier than his words. Sam let out a breath. He's not done, is he? No, Marcus said softly. He's just getting started. He sat back down, journal in hand. The edge of the page trembled slightly as he wrote, though his face remained composed. Line drawn. Not for sale. He closed the book. His fingers lingered on the worn leather cover, still shaking ever so slightly. It wasn't just Clyde that unnerved him. It was the choice itself, the temptation, the weight of a single word, spoken wrong. Behind him, Sam fed a scrap of cloth into the tiny flame. The candle glowed a bit brighter, though its light still barely touched the darkness. Marcus watched it for a long moment, fragile, flickering, but still burning. Dark clouds churned above the cliffs like boiling tar. The wind howled across the ridge, carrying the scent of dust and rain. Marcus stood outside the lean-to shelter they'd built from canvas and scrap wood, tying down the last rope as thunder cracked overhead. He glanced toward the sky, jaw clenched. The storm had arrived faster than he expected. Inside, Sam lay wrapped in a threadbare blanket, his cheeks flushed with fever. He murmured something inaudible, twisting slightly as Marcus ducked back in, soaked to the bone. The pot of pinto bean soup was bubbling quietly over a low flame. Marcus reached out, stirred it with a wooden spoon, then dropped in 2 small pieces of cornbread to thicken the broth. The smell, earthy and warm, cut through the dampness and filled the small space with a fragile sense of comfort. Behind him, Clyde sat in the driest corner, hunched over his saddlebag. His hands moved quickly, checking and rechecking the contents. Gold flakes, wrapped in cloth and tucked between old shirts. Marcus didn't need to ask. "You're not even going to ask how the boy's doing?" Marcus said, voice low but edged with steel. Clyde didn't look up. "Kid's tough. He'll ride it out." "He's burning up," Clyde shrugged. "So boil some roots. You're the one playing nurse." Marcus stood, crossing the small space in 2 strides. "He's here because of me, and you're sitting there guarding a few pinches of gold like it's your dying breath." Clyde finally looked up. "You think that soup and a sermon's going to get us through this? That boy's not going to eat your good intentions when the storm washes half this hill into the ravine." "He's not a burden. He's not your kin either," Clyde snapped. "You're acting like this is some kind of family camping trip." Marcus's jaw tightened. "You think that's what this is?" The rain hit harder, hammering the canvas roof like stones. For a second, the only sound was wind whipping around them and the soft bubbling of the soup. Clyde stood slowly, slipping the bag over his shoulder. "I didn't come here to babysit. You stay and play house if you want, but I'm not losing my share because some kid got the sniffles." Marcus stepped forward. "You step out in that and you'll get yourself killed." Clyde's eyes flashed. "Better dead with gold than alive with nothing." Without another word, he pulled back the flap and walked into the storm. Rain swallowed him instantly, his silhouette vanishing into gray. But he left something behind. A trail of boot prints in the soaked earth, leading toward the deeper caverns they hadn't yet explored. Marcus watched the prints blur under the downpour, heart pounding. Behind him, Sam stirred and let out a soft moan. Marcus turned, kneeling beside the boy. He dipped a cloth in cool water, wiped Sam's forehead, then ladled out a small bowl of soup. The smell of pinto beans and cornbread hung in the air, warm and familiar. like Sunday afternoons at his mother's kitchen, long before the mines, before the struggle, before the gold. "Here, kid," Marcus whispered. "Let's get you through this." Outside, thunder rolled again, deeper this time, and somewhere out there, in the shadows of Red Rock Canyon, Clyde was moving deeper into the earth. Morning light crept slowly through the mist, casting a pale silver veil over the mouth of the cave. The storm had passed, but left behind a silence so heavy it felt sacred. The earth was still wet, the stones slick beneath Marcus's boots as he stepped out into the cool dawn air to check for Clyde's return. There was no sign of him. Just as Marcus turned back toward the shelter, a shadow moved through the fog. His hand instinctively reached for the small pick resting by the entrance, but the figure that emerged was familiar, bent slightly with age, face drawn taut with worry. "Henry," Marcus said, surprised. The old man looked thinner, the lines around his mouth deeper, his clothes damp and speckled with mud from the trail. He leaned against his walking stick, eyes searching the dim cave behind Marcus. "Is the boy all right?" Henry asked, skipping pleasantries. "He's resting," Marcus replied, "still running a fever, but better than last night." Henry stepped inside, his boots squelching slightly. He nodded toward the scattered gear, the fire still warm, and Sam's curled figure under the blanket. "You stayed," Henry murmured, more to himself than anyone else. Marcus poured him a tin cup of warm water. "Why are you here?" Henry took a slow sip, then fixed Marcus with a steady gaze. "Because I've seen what this place can do. I'd hate to see it take another one." A long pause settled between them. "I told you before," Henry continued, "this mine's taken more than it's given. Friends, brothers, men who thought they could beat the mountain." Marcus said nothing, eyes lowering. Henry took something from his pocket, an old folded piece of canvas. He laid it on a flat rock, revealing hand-drawn lines, faded ink, and symbols marked with charcoal. "This," he said, pointing, "is what we used to call the three-step code: safety, environment, community. Every dig, every strike followed these. First, don't go deeper than you can breathe. Second, never poison the land or the stream. And third, leave enough behind for someone else." Sam stirred at the sound and blinked up at them. Henry smiled gently. "Young man," he said, "come here." Sam rose slowly, eyes still groggy but curious. Henry handed him the map. "Add this to your own. You're the next one holding the compass." The boy took it with both hands, reverently, and nodded. Marcus hesitated. Then, perhaps out of guilt or weariness, he finally spoke. "I found it, Henry. Gold. Small flakes, but real." Henry didn't flinch. He simply looked away, toward the curtain of mist outside the cave. "Of course you did," he said quietly. The silence that followed was heavier than any accusation. "I didn't take much," Marcus added, as if that would make it better. "Just a few flecks, enough to know it's real." Henry sighed. "That's how it always starts." He reached into his vest and pulled out a small stone. Rough, dull, but with a thin shimmer of gold running through it like a vein of regret. "This belonged to the first man I ever dug with," he said, handing it to Marcus. "He thought it would buy him a future. All it bought him was a grave without a name." Marcus accepted the stone silently. Henry stepped back toward the entrance. "You think you're different. Smarter, kinder. Maybe you are. But gold doesn't care who you are." He turned to Sam, and his voice softened. "Hold on to that map, boy, and remember the rules." Then he disappeared into the fog, footsteps fading like old memories swallowed by time. Marcus stared down at the stone in his hand. Sam came to his side, carefully wrapping the rock in a cloth and placing it into a small pouch on his belt, as if it were sacred. Neither of them spoke for a long while. But Marcus, with the cold rock still pressing into his palm, knew this wasn't just about riches anymore. It never had been. The town of Dry Fork never stayed quiet for long. By the time the second Sunday rolled around after the storm, whispers had woven their way through every shop, porch, and pew. Marcus found something. That old canyon gave up its belly sure as sunrise. I heard the boy saw it too. Gold. Real gold. They didn't speak it aloud when Marcus passed. They only paused, shifting their gaze, lowering their voices. But the change was there, in the looks that lingered too long, in the nods that no longer came. Marcus noticed. He just didn't respond. He and Sam kept mostly to themselves, spending a few quiet days in town to restock supplies. The fever had left Sam's face, but not the boy's eyes. They still carried a weight too old for his age. On a particularly overcast morning, Marcus stepped onto the porch of their rented cabin to find a folded paper on the ground. No envelope, no name. Just 5 words scrawled in blunt pencil. "We know you found gold." He crumpled it without a word and tossed it into the stove. That afternoon, the town gathered for the weekly soup line outside the chapel. Pastor Hale had declared a community forum, his attempt to ease the tension that had been growing like dry brush around a spark. Eleanor was there, ladling hot bean soup into chipped bowls, her apron dotted with flour. She caught Marcus's eye for a moment and gave a nod, not warm but not cold either. A reminder of shared history, maybe. Sam helped set out slices of cornbread, moving quietly among the crowd. The townsfolk murmured to one another, stealing glances at Marcus as he took a spot near the edge. Pastor Hale stepped up to a crate-turned-makeshift podium. "Friends," he began, "this town's seen boom and bust, joy and sorrow. We've survived not by striking it rich, but by holding together." He paused, letting the words settle. "I hear things. I know you do too. Stories about treasure, about secrets in our hills. And I also know how fear and envy grow in silence." Marcus shifted his weight, eyes narrowing. "We're not here to accuse," Hale continued. "We're here to talk, openly, fairly." A few nods, a few grunts of agreement. Then from the crowd, a voice cut clear through the air. "Do you have it, Marcus?" Every head turned. A heavy-set man stepped forward, Jed Doyle, one of the grain mill workers. "You found gold, didn't you?" he asked, voice flat. "That's why you keep going up there. Why that other man keeps snooping around. You're hiding something from the rest of us." Marcus stood still, his bowl of soup cooling in his hands. The murmurs returned, louder now. Eleanor stopped ladling. Sam looked up from the cornbread tray, worry flickering across his face. Pastor Hale raised a hand. Let him speak. But Marcus didn't speak. He looked around, not at the accusing eyes, but at the chapel itself, the old wooden beams, the stew pot on the fire, the children laughing with crumbs on their lips, Eleanor quietly placing her ladle down. He felt the weight of every choice, every step into that canyon, every flake of gold still hidden in a cloth pouch beneath his bedroll. And yet, he said nothing. The silence stretched long, until it snapped into something new. Expectation, fear, hope. Whatever Marcus said next would decide what kind of man the town believed him to be. And in that pause, before the answer formed, the chapter turned. Night had fallen like a heavy curtain over Dry Fork. The wind whispered through the cracks in the wooden walls of Marcus's small cabin, carrying the scent of dust and something older. Regret, perhaps. Inside, the fire crackled in the stone hearth, casting long, flickering shadows across the worn floorboards. Marcus sat hunched over a narrow table, shoulders tight, a pen clutched in his calloused hand. Before him lay a single sheet of paper, creased from folding, stained with ink smudges and uncertainty. The letter wasn't long, but it had taken him 3 nights to write. It was a draft, a confession of sorts, not to any crime, but to a burden, a declaration that yes, he had found something in those hills. But it wasn't just gold. It was history. Pain. A story that belonged to more than one man. Behind him, Sam stirred from the corner chair, legs tucked beneath him like a cat. He had been quiet all evening, reading by the firelight, but now his voice broke the hush. "If you don't tell them," he said gently, "they'll never stop guessing. And guessing makes folks mean." Marcus didn't turn around. He simply exhaled, a sound between a sigh and a groan. His eyes scanned the letter once more. To the people of Dry Fork. He couldn't bring himself to finish reading it aloud. A soft knock at the door startled them both. Sam sprang up, but Marcus raised a hand. "I've got it." He opened the door slowly, half expecting another accusation slipped under the frame. But it was Eleanor. She stood in the lamplight, hair pulled back beneath a shawl, holding a cloth-covered basket. "Didn't want the bread to go stale," she said, eyes meeting his. Marcus stepped aside to let her in. The warmth of the fire drew her in instinctively, and she set the basket on the table. Inside were a few slices of cornbread, still warm. "I heard about the forum," she said. "Heard you didn't say much." Marcus gave a non-committal grunt. Eleanor's eyes fell on the letter. "Planning to?" He hesitated. "I don't know." Sam took a seat beside the hearth again, watching the 2 adults in silence, his small hands curled around his knees. Eleanor pulled out a chair and sat across from Marcus. "You're not the first man to chase something shiny and dangerous," she said. "But if you let it own you, it wins twice." He stared at the flickering fire. "What if it's already too late?" Eleanor shook her head. "It's only too late if you stop trying to do right." Sam chimed in, voice soft but clear. "Maybe you could read it at the next gathering. Or let Pastor Hale do it." Marcus's hand hovered above the page. The words stared back like a challenge. Before he could respond, the sound came, distant, steady, then closer. Hoofbeats. Not just a rider passing through. These were deliberate, headed for him. All 3 turned toward the window. Sam rushed over, peeking through the curtain. "It's him," the boy whispered. "Clyde." Marcus stood, his chair scraping the floor. The fire popped behind him. On the table, the letter trembled with the draft of the open door, its ink glinting faintly under the lamplight. He didn't move to grab it. Eleanor stood too, her eyes narrowing. "You want me to stay?" Marcus shook his head, though his fingers twitched at his sides. "No, but thank you." She nodded once, then reached out and placed a warm hand over his. "Whatever he's come for, remember who you are, not what you found." With that, she left quietly, her shawl trailing behind her like a whisper. Marcus closed the door and turned back toward the table. The letter remained untouched. The fire cast his shadow long and thin across the floor, stretching toward the unknown. Then came another knock. Clyde stepped through the door like a ghost. His coat dripped water onto the floor, the last drops from a passing storm, and his boots left heavy, dark marks on the worn planks. The fire had burned low, casting only a dull orange glow. The silence between the three of them was thick as fog. Marcus stood near the table, one hand resting on the back of a chair. Sam sat on the edge of the hearth, staring wide-eyed at the man who had, until now, only come around with threats or sly smiles. But tonight, Clyde looked different, weary. His eyes were rimmed with red, not from drink, but something deeper. His face, once tight with calculation, now sagged beneath the weight of sleeplessness and regret. "I didn't come to fight," he said, his voice rough. Marcus said nothing. Clyde took another step forward and dropped his wet hat onto the table. "I came to ask." The fire popped. "I got debts," Clyde said. "Land back in Rattler's Bluff. Old ranch my brother left me before he died. Tried to make it work. Didn't. The bank's got its hand at my throat." Still, Marcus didn't speak. His face was unreadable. Clyde's eyes flicked to Sam, then back. "I know I've been a bastard. I thought maybe I could bluff my way to a better life. But that mine, that gold, it's real. You know it. I know it. And I figure maybe there's still a way forward. For both of us." He reached into his coat and pulled out a folded paper. Not a gun, not a threat. A proposal. A proper split. 50-50. You don't gotta dig forever. We take what we can, quiet-like. No one else gets hurt. No one else needs to know. Sam stood up now, fists clenched. "You already hurt people. You lied. You tried to trick us." Clyde held up his hands. "I know. I did wrong, but I'm trying to do right now." Marcus looked at the paper, then at Clyde. Then he spoke. "No." Clyde blinked. "What?" "No deal. No digging. No split." He walked over to the small shelf and picked up the leather-bound journal, the one he'd been filling since that first day in the canyon. He held it like a Bible. "This has every step I took, every mistake, every warning Henry gave me. This gold's cursed if we use it the way you're asking. And I won't be part of that." Clyde's shoulders slumped. For a moment, he looked like a man on the edge of collapse. "I got nothing else," he whispered. Marcus's voice softened just a hair. "Then maybe it's time to build something that isn't made of gold." A long silence passed. Sam moved closer to Marcus. The boy's small hand brushed the man's sleeve. Clyde looked at them both, then down at the floor. He nodded once, slow, like the decision cost him something, then turned without a word. He picked up his soggy hat and stepped out into the fading light. They watched him go. His figure shrank as he crossed the field, the gray sky swallowing him in layers of shadow. Inside, Marcus returned to the table. The letter still lay where he had left it, unread, unsigned. He didn't touch it. Instead, he sat, reached into his coat pocket, and pulled out the small, jagged stone Henry had given him. It gleamed faintly in the firelight. Not gold, but something older, quieter. Sam leaned in. "What are we going to do with the gold now?" Marcus didn't answer right away. His thumb traced the rough edge of the stone. Outside, the wind had quieted. Only the soft creak of the cabin's walls filled the space between them. He looked at Sam, then at the fire, and finally at the journal. The choice was his, but for tonight, he stayed silent. The autumn sun cast a golden hue over the town square. Bright pennants fluttered from every pole, ribbons danced in the breeze, and the smell of roasted corn mixed with fresh-baked pies floated through the air. Children ran between booths with sticky hands and wide smiles. Musicians played fiddles on the church steps. Laughter echoed down the wooden sidewalks. And for the first time in many seasons, the town felt whole. Marcus stood near the edge of the crowd, his hat in one hand, the worn leather bag in the other. He watched as families shared meals, neighbors hugged, and old friends exchanged stories. The community, his community, had gathered for the harvest festival, unaware of what he was about to do. Sam stood beside him, eyes bright, clutching the folded map he'd been drawing since their first journey into the canyon. The boy was taller now, a little stronger, a little wiser. He nudged Marcus gently. "You ready?" he asked. Marcus took a deep breath. "As I'll ever be." He stepped up onto the small platform in front of the wooden chapel, next to Reverend Hale, who nodded with calm encouragement. Henry Dalton leaned against a nearby beam, arms folded, eyes steady. Eleanor stood among the crowd, a bowl of steaming stew in her hands, her gaze fixed on Marcus with quiet pride. Marcus cleared his throat. The music quieted, conversations died down. All eyes turned toward him. "I've spent most of my life chasing something," he began, voice rough from wind and years. "Chasing a better life, chasing survival, chasing gold." A ripple of murmurs passed through the crowd. "But the thing about gold," he continued, "is it doesn't solve much. Not really. It doesn't build trust. It doesn't raise children. It doesn't mend fences between neighbors." He paused, holding up the weathered leather bag. "This came from Red Rock Canyon. It's real. It's valuable, and it nearly cost me more than I could bear." He stepped down, walked slowly to the steps of the church, and handed the bag to Reverend Hale. "I want it to start a fund for the widows, the orphans, the sick, the lost. Let it be something that binds us together, not tears us apart." For a moment there was only silence. Then Henry stepped forward and placed a hand on Marcus's shoulder. "Well done," the old man said simply. Eleanor's eyes glistened. She set her stew aside and walked up, wrapping Marcus in a warm embrace. "You did right." Reverend Hale opened the bag slightly, revealing the glimmer of gold dust and small nuggets within. He raised his hands. "Let this offering be a symbol, not of greed, but of grace." And with that, the town erupted in applause, not wild, not chaotic, but steady and heartfelt. People clapped not just for the gold, but for the man who had brought it back and chosen a different path. Sam ran up and threw his arms around Marcus's waist. "You're a real cowboy now," he said, beaming. Marcus smiled, resting a hand on the boy's head. As the festival resumed, music, laughter, stories shared over food, Marcus stepped away for a moment of stillness. He walked to the edge of the field beyond the square, where a few skinny cattle grazed under the slanting sun. The wind carried the scent of dry grass and wood smoke. He looked out at the open land, the mountains far off in the distance, the place where this all began, and he smiled. Not for gold, not for glory, but for peace. When Marcus gave away the gold, he didn't just give up wealth. He gave his community something far more valuable: hope, dignity, and unity. In a world where greed often speaks the loudest, he chose generosity. Sometimes the real treasure isn't buried in the ground, but in the choices we make when no one's watching. Gold can buy comfort, but character builds legacy. So what would you have done in Marcus's boots? Would you have walked away richer or stood taller? If this story made you reflect, comment the number 1 below. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or state in the comments. Love powerful, emotional, true stories from the Old West? Hit that subscribe button so you don't miss the next tale from True Wild West Stories.